He loved her so deeply. He sang to the gods of death. He sang to monsters and shadows, and they listened. With nothing but his lyre and a broken heart, he walked into the land of the dead to bring her back. But one glance, one moment of doubt, destroyed everything. And what followed turned Orpheus into legend and into a warning for all who dare to love too much. This is not just a love story. It's a tale of devotion that defied death, of a man who faced the gods not with weapons, but with music. He sang to bring her back, and for a moment, it worked. But one silent mistake erased everything. Today, you'll discover the true tragedy of Orpheus, the man who dared to rescue love from death and lost it with a glance. Origins of Orpheus. Before Orpheus became legend, he was simply gifted. Born of Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, and, according to some myths, Apollo himself, god of music, prophecy, and light, Orpheus came into the world not with cries, but with music in his blood. He didn't need armies. He had a lyre, and that was enough. As a child, his music could do what words and weapons never could. Wolves sat at his feet, tamed by melody. Storms paused above his head, listening. Even the trees would lean in, drawn toward his voice, as if the earth itself longed to hear him play. While others trained in combat and politics, Orpheus mastered only one thing: harmony. Not just of notes, but of emotion, of atmosphere, of soul. His fame spread fast. He played in the courts of kings, on the mountains of gods, and even in the wild places where nothing human dared to go. And wherever his music reached, silence followed, not from fear, but awe. They said his lyre could heal the wounded. They said his voice could bring peace to the restless. They said his songs carried something divine, a sound that reminded mortals and immortals alike of something they had forgotten, what it means to feel. But Orpheus didn't seek glory. He didn't want temples or statues. He only wanted beauty. And eventually, love. And when he found Eurydice, everything changed. The music that once moved mountains now sang only for her. His melodies softened, slowed, each note a confession, each chord a vow. He had played for gods, but for the first time, he played for one heart. Orpheus was not a warrior, but he was dangerous, because he could make anyone believe, even the gods. And that power would soon lead him into darkness. But before the tragedy, there was light. A boy born of poetry and sun. A man who could make the world listen, and who would one day make even the dead weep. Orpheus and Eurydice. They met like a song meeting its lyrics. Orpheus, the voice that moved heavens. Eurydice, the silence that made that voice matter. She was a dryad, a nymph of the forest, wild, radiant, untamed. While mortals feared the woods, she danced barefoot among shadows. To her, the wind was a companion. To him, she became the song. The day they married, the skies were impossibly blue. The kind of blue that makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen. Birds circled in quiet harmony. The breeze carried the scent of myrrh and crushed laurel leaves. The altar stood between two olive trees, ancient, gnarled but still bearing fruit, as if the earth itself was giving it its blessing. Gods were watching. The Muses, Orpheus's kin, whispered among themselves, proud and wary. Apollo smiled from the clouds. Even Dionysus, wild and unpredictable, seemed to pause his madness for one sacred afternoon. Guests came from every corner of the land, dryads and satyrs, shepherds and kings. Even the animals stayed close, enchanted by the notes Orpheus played as his bride approached. Eurydice walked toward him in a flowing robe of pale green, her hair crowned with tiny white flowers. She didn't need gold or jewels. Her smile was enough. And when Orpheus looked at her, everything else fell away. Time slowed. The world listened. But fate was already listening too. And it doesn't like to be ignored. Some say the gods were jealous. Some say there are loves so pure they attract tragedy like a flame draws moths. Because moments later, as Eurydice danced in the tall grass just beyond the altar, barefoot and laughing, a serpent coiled in silence beneath the leaves. One step, just one, and it struck. Its fangs sank into her ankle. Her laughter stopped. She collapsed before anyone understood what had happened. No scream, just a gasp, like a breath being stolen mid-song. Orpheus ran to her. He called her name. He cradled her in his arms as the color drained from her skin. He begged, he sang, but the gods did not answer. And just like that, the music died. Days passed, then weeks, but Orpheus couldn't move on. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He played his lyre only to the wind, and even the birds grew silent with grief. He didn't blame the gods. He blamed himself. He was the son of divine power, the voice that soothed monsters, and yet he couldn't save the one person he truly loved. So one morning, without telling a soul, he made a choice no mortal had ever dared before. He turned his back on the world of light and walked into the dark. He took nothing but his lyre. No weapons, no torch, just melody. And he walked toward the gates of Hades, the underworld, the place no one returns from. Not heroes, not kings, not lovers. But he wasn't going to plead. He was going to sing. The journey to Hades. No mortal had ever done what Orpheus was about to do. Because the underworld was not just a place of death, it was a boundary. A wall between what was and what could never be again. But Orpheus didn't see it as a wall.
He saw it as a door, and he intended to open it with music. He reached the entrance at dusk, a shadowy cave known by few, feared by all. The wind stopped there, as if even nature refused to follow. But Orpheus stepped forward, each footfall echoing deeper into silence. He tuned his lyre once, softly, and began to descend. The deeper he walked, the colder the air became. Light faded until even memory dimmed. Here, color did not exist, only shades of gray and echoes of sorrow. And then a growl. 3 growls. Cerberus, the hound of Hades, stood at the threshold. 3 massive heads, 3 sets of fangs dripping with shadow, one beast bred to devour the living. But Orpheus didn't flinch. He played. The notes weren't forceful. They weren't commands. They were lullabies. Each string sang of stillness, of the quiet grief that asks for no answer. The beast hesitated, then lay down, its heads resting one by one. Eyes closed, breath slowed. Even death listens when music tells the truth. Next came Charon, the boatman of the river Styx, pale, hooded, silent. He ferried only the dead, and only for a coin. Orpheus had no coin, but he had a song. He played of love so deep it drowned, of hope tied to pain, of footsteps that no longer followed behind. Charon said nothing, just extended his hand and gestured toward the boat. And so they crossed. The Styx, black and thick like oil, moved around them without ripples. All along the shore, lost souls reached out, weeping silently, clawing at memories they could no longer hold. Orpheus kept playing. For them. For her. Beyond the river, the underworld revealed itself. The asphodel fields, gray flowers blooming where joy was buried. The Elysian plains, golden light reserved for heroes and the blessed. And Tartarus, far below, where eternal punishment screamed without sound. But Orpheus sought neither paradise nor punishment. He sought the throne. And there they were. Hades, god of the dead, robed in black and shadow. And beside him, Persephone, the queen of that cold realm, radiant even in stillness. The moment they saw him, silence fell deeper. Mortals did not come here. Mortals did not walk here. But Orpheus didn't bow. He didn't speak. He played. And the music that rose from his lyre was not of the living world. It was raw. It was honest. He played the moment she died, the stillness of her final breath, the emptiness in his chest where laughter used to live. He played the wedding that turned to mourning, the altar overgrown with weeds, the bed that stayed untouched. And for the first time in the halls of the dead, Hades wept. Not openly, not with sobs, but with the smallest tremble of the hand, as if touched by something even he couldn't contain. Persephone turned to him, her voice soft as mist. Bring her back, but under one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead. Eurydice would follow in silence. He could not look back, not once, until both had reached the world above. If he looked, she would vanish forever. He nodded, not because he trusted the condition, but because he had no choice. And so began the final part of the journey. The moment of doubt. He walked slowly, each step forward echoing with the weight of everything behind him. The tunnel that led out of the underworld was long, dark, and twisting, a passage carved between death and life. No light, no sound, only Orpheus, and somewhere behind him, Eurydice. He couldn't hear her breathing, couldn't feel her hand, couldn't turn. This was the test. His music had bent the will of gods, tamed monsters, melted stone-hearted spirits. But this demanded silence and faith. And faith is so much harder when it's quiet. At first, he walked with confidence. He trusted the deal. He believed that if the gods had granted it, it must be true. But the longer the path stretched, the more doubt crept in, like cold water filling a room, slowly, relentlessly. What if they had tricked him? What if she wasn't really there? What if she had stumbled and fallen behind? What if this whole thing was a cruel game and he was walking alone? He strained to hear her footsteps. Once he thought he heard a whisper, then silence again. He gripped his lyre tighter. The tunnel narrowed, the ceiling pressed lower. He was close. He could feel it. A faint glow ahead. The world of the living. Just a few more steps. And then, a shiver. A shift in the air. He felt her presence. Close. So close. But something inside him cracked. Not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too much to risk being wrong. He needed to see her. Just once. To know she was really there. His heart screamed to wait, but the silence behind him was louder. So he turned. And in that single moment, everything ended.
There she was, Eurydice, pale as mist, with her hand outstretched. Her eyes met his, wide, pleading, full of love and fear. And then she began to fade. Her mouth moved, maybe calling his name, but no sound came. She reached for him and dissolved like smoke. Drawn backward, swallowed by the shadows, as if the underworld itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this one fatal mistake. Orpheus tried to grab her, tried to run into the darkness again, but the path had closed, the deal was broken, and Eurydice was gone. Not taken by a god, not stolen by death, but lost because of one look, one glance, one moment of doubt. And now, there was no music left, no melody that could undo it, no song that could bring her back again. He had failed, not because he was weak, not because he didn't believe, but because he was human. The aftermath. Orpheus emerged from the underworld, alone. No celebration, no sunlight bright enough to pierce what now lived inside him. The same world that once echoed with his music now felt unbearably silent. Birds still sang, the wind still moved through trees, but to him it was noise. Empty, colorless. He had looked back, and she was gone, forever. He wandered, through valleys once filled with their laughter, through forests where she used to dance. Every step took him farther from the last place he saw her, and deeper into himself. He no longer played joyful songs. He no longer played for crowds. His music turned inward, low, aching, fractured. The kind of melody that makes even flowers bend their heads. The kind of silence that weighs heavier than sound. He rejected all company, even when kings begged him to return to their courts, even when maidens sang his name with longing. He wanted none of it. He had touched something sacred and lost it. What could the world possibly offer now? The only companions he accepted were the trees, the rivers, the stars. He slept under the open sky. He played to the moon. He wept with the rain. Some say animals would still gather around him, drawn by grief as much as beauty. They didn't ask questions. They didn't speak. They just listened. And somehow, that was enough. Others say he stopped eating, that he slowly faded into something half man, half memory, a shadow wrapped in melody and regret. Time passed. The world moved on, but Orpheus stayed in place, trapped between life and the echo of a love that no longer answered. He didn't blame the gods. He didn't scream or curse the sky, because he knew the fault was his. One moment of doubt, one glance. That's all it took to lose everything. And so he lived with it, not as punishment, but as truth. There's a kind of mourning that never ends. It just changes shape. Orpheus wore it like a second skin. Every note he played carried it. Every breath he took remembered her. And even in silence, Eurydice lived in the spaces between his songs. His death. They say grief turns to legend when the world doesn't know what else to do with it. And Orpheus, once a man, now a ghost of melody, had become too much for the living. He no longer belonged among them. According to the old myths, it wasn't time or sorrow that ended his life. It was madness, violence, worship without understanding. A group of Maenads, wild, frenzied women who followed Dionysus, found him alone in the forest. He had rejected them. Not just them, but all women, all joy, all flesh. He wanted only silence, only memory. To them, that was blasphemy. To worship Dionysus was to embrace chaos, ecstasy, and the body. Orpheus in his grief had renounced it all. So, they punished him. In a frenzy, they attacked, ripping his cloak, smashing his lyre, dragging him down into the dirt. He didn't fight back. He didn't scream. He simply closed his eyes as if ready. They tore him apart limb by limb. His blood soaked the moss. His body became fragments of silence. But the myth doesn't end there, because as the Maenads fled, breathless with divine fury, his head remained whole. And not only whole, alive. His severed head, lips still soft with song, floated gently down the river Hebrus. His lyre followed, cradled in the current beside him. And as the waters carried them away, something impossible happened. He sang. No lungs, no body, just his voice, echoing over the waters like a hymn from beyond life. Soft, sorrowful, but beautiful. The sound of a love too strong to die quietly. The river did not drown him. It delivered him. Carried across lands, his head finally reached the island of Lesbos, where it came to rest in a sacred cave. There, the people said it never stopped singing, that even in death, Orpheus's voice spoke truths the gods wouldn't say aloud.
That the wind coming from the cave carried wisdom, that the silence afterward made you weep. And the lyre? It was lifted into the heavens by the gods themselves, placed among the stars as the constellation Lyra, so that mortals would forever look up and remember him. Not as a warrior, not as a king, but as the man who loved so deeply, sang so purely, that not even death could silence his voice. Even dismembered, Orpheus remained whole in the only way that mattered: his music, his truth. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of all, that what remains of us isn't always flesh or name, but the echoes we leave behind. The legacy of Orpheus. They had torn his body, they had silenced his breath, but Orpheus had already crossed too many thresholds for death to be his final chapter. The river carried his head, still whispering to Lesbos. There, the people built a shrine, not to a god, not to a conqueror, but to a man who loved too deeply and sung too purely. The cave where his head lay became sacred. It is said the winds that emerged from that cavern spoke truths no oracle dared utter. Travelers came from far lands, not seeking prophecy, but something rarer, a voice that had nothing left to lose. But the real end of Orpheus's suffering didn't happen on Earth. It happened below it. Because while his severed head floated on water, his soul, fractured and aching, descended into the underworld for the second and final time. And this time, he was not a trespasser. He was not bargaining or begging. He was a ghost returning home. Hades, the cold king, watched him arrive, and beside him, Persephone, queen of shadows, who knew all things broken and beautiful, stood still. But it was not Hades who moved. It was Eurydice. She came from the shadows, her steps no longer echoes, but certain, solid, free. She saw him, all of him, not just the singer, not just the man who had failed, but the man who had tried. And she smiled. In that moment, Orpheus's suffering, years of grief, silence, wandering, death, ended. No gods interfered. No conditions were set. There were no ultimatums. Just two souls meeting once more, this time beyond the reach of mistakes. And in the deep, hidden silence of the underworld, they embraced. No music, no light, only truth. They say that Orpheus never left Hades again, that he chose to remain, not as a prisoner, but as a companion. Finally, truly, with Eurydice. His voice stopped wandering. His grief no longer sang, because he no longer needed it to. And yet, the legacy of Orpheus rose. His lyre, retrieved by the gods, was placed in the sky as Lyra, so all who looked upward would remember. Not every story ends in reunion, but every soul that dares to love leaves a mark on the world. Philosophers invoked his name, mystery cults adopted his myth, artists painted him, poets mourned him. They said his songs shaped the very foundations of Western music, that every note sung in sorrow, every melody carved from memory, whispers his name. Because Orpheus taught us this, that love is not safe, that the soul does not forget, and that sometimes the only way to live is to sing, even when it hurts. He was not perfect. He looked back. He lost everything. And yet, he became eternal. Not in stone, not in gold, but in the fragile, immortal echo of love that never stopped searching. So maybe the gods didn't curse him. Maybe they simply watched as a man did what they feared most. He loved without boundaries. He gave everything, his voice, his heart, his fate. And though he failed, his failure became a myth that survived the centuries. Not because it was perfect, but because it was human. We remember Orpheus not as the man who won, but as the man who tried, who walked into death armed with nothing but a song, who reminded us that love is not about winning, it's about risk. And sometimes, one glance is enough to lose everything. But it's also enough to be remembered. And that is the real legacy of Orpheus. If Greek mythology makes your soul stir, hit subscribe. More legends are waiting.